Now, the one thing I do want to document, because we may have some people in here that are really not even a NASCAR fan whatsoever, and that's simply, what is a crew chief? Well, again, my love for football, college football especially, it's pretty simple. The crew chief is the head coach, and then in some regards, you may look at the fact that the crew chief is the head coach and the driver is somewhat like the quarterback. The difference in a crew chief in NASCAR versus a head coach, unfortunately, you can never call timeout. Yeah, we have cautions, but that's probably when a crew chief decision making even gets more ramped up. So that's, to me, the biggest difference of a crew chief in NASCAR and maybe a coach of a stick and ball sport. In the evolution of a crew chief that I even saw during my 18 years, and especially over the last 13 years, because if I go back to that very first race team that I went to work for in 1980, we only had 3 full-time employees. You had to be pretty much a specialist at everything that you did. Now, we had volunteers that came in and helped us at night and on the weekends, but there were only 3 of us, and we ran the entire schedule. Spin it ahead to 2000, my last year as a crew chief, I very rarely got to work on the race car because we had 35 employees just in the race shop alone. So the biggest thing I had to do was be a good people person, and that was hard for me to adapt to because I was always a hands-on type of a crew chief, and for the most part I had to become more of a manager. And you know, our sport is like any other sport or any other business. At the end of the day, your success was about people. And as I mentioned a while ago, you know, I think one of the reasons that I did have some success was surrounding myself with good people. And I'm not on a crusade to promote education in NASCAR, but I can't stress enough, and I talked to some students. I was actually at the University of South Carolina just a couple of weeks ago speaking to some students about the importance of education in NASCAR. I know my son Brandon that races. He looked at me periodically and said, "Now wait a minute, Dad, you barely had a high school education, and look what you've been able to accomplish." And I stop him dead in his tracks, and I would tell him, that worked back in 1980. It will not work here now in 2011, 2012, 2013, because our sport has become such a specialized sport. And I even look at some of our drivers. You look at Ryan Newman, very successful Sprint Cup Series driver. He just won the race at Indianapolis a couple of months ago. He actually has a mechanical engineering degree from Purdue University. And everybody has become so specialized in our sport. It's become a very engineering-driven sport, and even all of the teams have become very independent. It used to be all that it was around the race team was the race team itself, but now these race teams have gotten so big that they have their marketing department, they have their PR department, they have their sponsorship shirts people, so they've pretty much become very, very self-contained. You know, when I look back at my 18 years as a crew chief, aside from the things that I were able to accomplish, probably the thing that I count my blessings the most, of the drivers, of the teams, of the owners that I was able to be involved with. You look at the drivers, it's almost like a who's list of drivers. When I was able to work with David Pearson and Davey Allison and Dale Earnhardt and Dale Jarrett, Ernie Irvin. And when I look back at the drivers that I worked with, I can't say that I didn't have a bad relationship with any of them. I actually had a good relationship with all of them. But when I look back, the drivers or driver that I had the most success with ended up being, I think, the driver that I had the best relationship with, and that was certainly Davey Allison. Davey Allison and I were absolutely best friends. And of course, he was killed in a helicopter crash in July of 1993. So when we lost him, I didn't not only lost the race car driver that I was working with and was enjoying some success with, but I absolutely lost my best friend. Our families were really close to each other. In fact, I mentioned my son Brandon. The Allisons, Davey and Liz, they had a son Robbie, and they were only a few months apart. We even had them baptized together. And Linda and I, my wife and I, are Robbie Allison's godparents, and Davey and Liz are Brandon's godparents. And when you look at a Sprint Cup Series crew chief, one thing that I've told a lot of people, and I'm sure my wife Linda would probably 100% agree, that it's not a job, it's really not a career, it's absolutely a life that you have to experience, because we have the longest sporting season of any sport out there. The analogy I give is, if you look at Major League Baseball right now, which are in their divisional playoffs, well, we started 1 month before they ever even had opening day. We started way back in early February. And of course, they didn't start till April 1st, essentially. And they're going to go through their regular season. They're having their playoffs. They're going to have their World Series here in about a week or so. They're going to crown a world champion. And we still have another month of racing. We essentially race from Valentine's Day to Thanksgiving. And then honestly, with our sport, we really don't have an off season, because unlike stick and ball sports, there's so many things to do during the off season. We would work harder during the off season than sometimes we would during the regular season. It's just we were not having to do as much traveling as we were during the actual regular season.